mission now. I'm on a mission now. I'm on a mission now. I'm on a mission now.
Hi guys, welcome back to the mission. My name is Milan Germishuizen. I'm a guide with Flycastaway, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to tie a merkin. It's a fly that's done really well for us on bonefish, triggerfish, bumphead parrotfish, but it's definitely my go-to fly for Indo-Pacific permit. And yeah, today I'll just be tying a color that I found it works really, really well for me on the flats of St. Brandon's. So the merkin is supposed to imitate a crab. A merkin is actually a pubic wig. It was worn by prostitutes and sex workers way back in the day, and the fly was made famous by a guy called Del Brown, and I think they obviously went with the name of merkin because it does look quite fluffy and spiky. So you guys will see I use sculpting fiber for my merkins. It's pretty much because it does wick water quite easily when you're casting it, so it doesn't soak up water like another thing like wool would or other yarns. It is traditionally tied with wool or yarn, but I do feel that the sculpting fiber, or even if you have access to things like EP fiber, that would be a great synthetic to use in this fly. I trim mine a little bit rounder and almost heart-shaped so that it gives a nice profile and silhouette down at the bottom, because I generally am fishing this at fish that are actively feeding and tailing rather than fish that are cruising and moving around. As I mentioned earlier, it's definitely my preferred pattern for a species like Indo-Pacific permit, and that's purely because on an area like St. Brandon's we are finding a lot more fish that are actively feeding and tailing, and I find that if you can drop this fly nicely, lead the fish by about 35-40 centimeters in front of him as he's cruising around feeding, it leaves a nice profile on the bottom. It's got good static movement with the longer legs and the larger pincers, and in this color it just seems to do really, really well for us out there. Once you've found your fish and you've presented that fly that kind of distance in front of it to lead it slightly, what you basically want to do is you want to just nice long slow strip. For those of you guys who have fished for things like bonefish, it's a very similar length strip. It's a little bit slower than a bonefish strip, and you just kind of always want to be in contact with the fly, even from when it lands, because often if the fish is busy tailing, you drop the fly in front of him, more often than not that fish can eat it on the drop, so it'll suck it in, or as soon as it hits the bottom, you get in contact with the whole system, there's a good chance that you're going to get the fish's attention. He's going to come cruise and dip down, and sometimes you don't actually see him actually ingest the fly, you just got to kind of feel for him. So it's always very, very important to stay in contact with your fly at all times. I tie it with a 3mm tungsten dumbbell up front here, and also the way that I trim it helps with the sink rate. I find that especially for tailing fish, the sink rate of the fly is incredibly important. There's no use in having this great looking fly as soon as it lands and it just kind of floats down like an umbrella. You want it to land softly and get in front of the fish and in that strike zone as quickly as possible. The sizes that I generally use for my merkins, the general one would be a size 2, and for that the hook that I would use is a Gamakatsu SL12S, just the normal one, but the Gamakatsu SL12S short does also work. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with these hooks, but they're basically, here they are. It's got a great shape, it's nice and light, and an incredibly strong hook for its size also. So that's definitely my go-to hook for this fly in particular. Then the weight that I use on this would be a tungsten dumbbell, generally in a size 3 millimeter. You can chop and change the colors. The 3 colors that I use are the dark gunmetal, nice light nickel color, and then also the goldish brass color. Today I've gone with the darker nickel for some reason. It's just something that I've always done. The lighter the fly, I like to use a slightly darker dumbbell in the front just to create a little bit of contrast on the fly. The thread that I use, it depends on what you're fishing for. If it's bumpies and triggers in the Seychelles and you want to use something orange, then definitely use an orange thread. But the colors that work very well for me on St. Brandon's tend to be a yellowy chartreuse or a more greenish chartreuse. This is a Veevis 8.0 tying thread. It's incredibly thin and very, very strong. So you can tie really, really strong saltwater patterns with this thread without having too much bulk in terms of thread buildup on your tie itself. The body material that I use for this fly is generally always Sculpting fiber made by Fisient. It's a South African product. I've been using the sand color quite often. That's the one that I'm going to be tying for you guys today. But you can also use tan. You can do a barred version of it, and then the shrimp color also works really, really well. It all just depends on the type of bottom that you're going to be fishing on, the color, and the kind of contrast that you want in the areas that you're going to be fishing. Then the legs that I use is generally just anything from a silly leg or these crazy legs in pearl by Hairline Pearl, and then I use these barred speckled legs on my tan versions. But you can go crazy with the legs. You can go more translucent, something with a little bit of a hot spot in. It all kind of comes down to your own personal preference and the areas that you're going to be fishing. But for what I do, generally I like the pearl colored legs. They work really well for me. And then the pincers, which you'll see up front here, it's very, very simple. I just take a couple of these feathers off a Indian cock cape. The color that I like the most in general is the badger color, and that's purely because of this normal color of the feather over here, but the fact that it has tiny little black tips is a good trigger for me, especially on St. Brandon's. I find that a lot of the crabs that I see out there have got little black or darker brown tips to their pincers. So in general, when I'm choosing my feathers, you'll see this one's been used quite a bit because I tie this fly a hell of a lot. I use it a lot when I'm out on the flats, but you generally want to find somewhere just up from these small ones. So if you are tying, let's say you're tying a size 6 merkin, you can use some of these smaller feathers down here. I usually go up a little bit, and you basically are looking for a feather kind of around this size. And I do 2 on each side of the shank. So another thing that I like to do also is I like to tie in weed guards on my flies. I know some people don't like weed guards. They say it might affect the hookup rate. I just find that the areas that I'm fishing for these fish, there's a lot of broken coral, turtle grass, that kind of stuff. And I'd rather have a weed guard and maybe not need it and be able to cut it off on the flats than not have one and actually need one. So I tie in weed guards into all my flies. And what I generally use is just a 30-pound, slightly flexible fluorocarbon. I find that the fluoro is obviously very translucent in the water, so it's much tougher for the fish to see. 30-pound is a nice diameter, so that even if the fish does come down, it's not maybe going to mess with it, with how it eats the fly or kind of chase the fish away. And it is definitely stiff enough to push off a piece of turtle grass or even a little bit of coral. Okay, and then in terms of the knot that I use to tie this onto my leader, I just use a normal straight up perfection loop, but you can go with any other loop knot. It just kind of helps to impart a little bit more movement as you strip it, or as it's sinking. It's got a little bit more static movement. I think with a loop knot, it just kind of wiggles a little bit more. The most important thing with your loop knot is it must be small. If it's a little bit big, it can either get fouled around your dumbbell eyes, or if it's really, really big, it can get caught around your weed guard. So I go in from underneath. You'll see, just feed it through like that. It'll be dangling. I have the tag in, sticking out the top. Hold the fly in my right hand. Just one. Crisscross over like that. Make a loop. Then I take the tag end, wrap it around that loop, and then I pinch so that you have 2 loops here. The fly is now on the outside loop there. Pull it slightly tighter. Then with your tag end, you bisect the big loop and that small loop that your fly is attached onto. You grab the part of the big loop on the right hand side, you make it slightly larger, you feed it over the fly, make sure not to catch the weed guard or any of the legs. You pull the main line going towards your fly line, And what I like to do sometimes is just kind of wiggle with it, grab the tag end with my teeth, pull it in slightly, and then just kind of cinch it down, and then you'll see a small little loop knot, and the tag end is coming out at 90 degrees, which means that that knot is seated perfectly. Now it's a nice small loop, so I know it's not going to get fouled on anything, and it's going to still impart a lot of movement in my fly as I strip it. Yeah, so pop your hook into the vise. For this pattern, I like to use a Gamakatsu SL12S in a size 2. This is the normal one with the normal shank. I sometimes also use the short shank version. And then just lay down a little layer of thread on the hook shank. I like to use chartreuse. For some reason that color has been really effective for us, not only with bonefish but also with permit on St. Brandon's. Work all the way forward here, and then a little size 3 tungsten dumbbell. A little bit of super glue. And then you just X-wrap that on here around the eye. It's okay if it's a little bit skew, you can always just get it in place, have a look at it from the side and straighten it out. Once your dumbbells are in place, I'll just usually work my way back to the back side of the hook, leave it there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Indian cock cape. I use badger color, and you just want to select 2 feathers that are of similar size, length and color, pull them out, and then I'll generally put one on either side of the hook. And then I'll have another one on either side, because I'd like to tie 2 on either side of the hook. So what I like to do is the brighter side of the feather, as it curves outwards, I like to make sure it curves out like that, so basically the pincers will be splayed outward. It gives a nicer profile to the fly, and also while you're stripping, the feather should pulse in and then bounce back slightly. I'll take my first feather. This can be a little bit fiddly because sometimes they want to spin around the shank. I'll do a couple of loose wraps, just kind of reposition it slightly. I'm happy with that. Then I take the other feather, put it on the opposite side of the hook shank. Don't worry if the one feather is a little bit longer than the other one, just try and get it in place, because what you can do, because of the loose wraps, you can just pull it slightly and get it the same length as the first feather you tied in. And there we go. A couple of harder wraps just to get those feathers in place. Go. I also find that if they are slightly longer, you're going to definitely impart more static movement. There we go. One side, and then again on this side here. So then the second pair of feathers, you basically just want to put it on top of the first pair. If it's slightly off, it's not a train smash, because then it will kind of give more of a pincer kind of look. And when it does get wet, they do tend to stick together. The reason why I do 2 is sometimes you might hook a little little snapper or an emperor fish and lose a pincer, it just makes it slightly more durable, and it will have a little bit more movement as you strip it, and even just leave it in the current. And you snip these off here. So you basically want it to look like that. So now you've got, you got your two feathers on this side of the shank, your two feathers on that side of the shank. You can see they're slightly angled out like that. Now what I like to do is I like to turn my hook on my vise so that my hook is upside down like this, because I'm going to be stacking the body on this bottom side of the hook here. So for this one, I'm going to be using sand colored sculpting fiber. So I find the best way to deal with this is, instead of cutting off small little strips and tying them in, I take one long strip. You basically want it about, if you look at it, about 1.5 times the thickness of the shank. It's going to will splay out quite a bit, so you don't need a lot of this stuff to create the illusion of bulk. But if you have a lot of bulk, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go back and trim a lot more, otherwise your fly will not keel over properly. I take it and I lay it on top or on the bottom part of the shank like this. And because you've got the loose wraps, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit, move it all the way to where the feathers meet, pull down hard. And for the first step, I like to do another X wrap, just so that I know that first one is in place and it's not going anywhere. After the X wrap, a couple of quite hard turns right up against the X wrap to kind of pull that X even tighter. And you can see that is not going anywhere. And I just trim that off. So now I do one more stack of, or X wrap of sculpting fiber. This is just a single one, like that. And again over like that. You can manipulate it again, push it back so that they're right up against each other. I pull this back and do a couple more tight turns in there. 1, 2, like 5 basically. And there you go. Now this is just like personal preference, but at this step I tie in my first set of legs. So I'll do 2 steps, a set of legs, then 3 steps, another set of legs, another 3 steps, and another set of legs. I only put 6 legs into these crabs. I kind of feel that smart as fish are, I don't think they can count how many legs a crab has. And now what I'll do is I'll just fold them over and cut them like that. So what I'll do, I'll turn my vise slightly because I want to tie it in here down the side of the hook shank. Do 2 or maybe 3 loose wraps, pull it through slightly, there we go, and then just cinch it down quite hard, and there you have your first leg in place. You repeat this step back onto the other side here. And there we go. Your first set of legs are tied in now. We go back to our sculpting fiber and repeat those first 2 steps, but we do it 3 times, and then we'll do another set of legs. Again, you can manipulate it a little bit, make sure they're right up against each other, and you can also hide the tie-in point of where the legs have gone in. Pull it back slightly, with a little bit of pressure on your bobbin, and then a couple of tight turns right up against that X-wrap there. Another one. So we'll do another one over here, and you'll see I only do 1 thread wrap for the rest of the fly apart from that first step, and that's basically just to reduce thread bulk building up on my fly itself. Plus this thread that I'm using is very, very strong. It's a Veevis 8.0, so it's very, very thin but incredibly strong, so you don't need too much bulk and too much thread to keep the material on the hook itself. Okay, so now as you can see, we've done 1, 2, a set of legs. Now 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to do another set of legs. Slide it down the side here. 1, 2, 3 loose-ish wraps. Now you can kind of wiggle it around, make sure that it's not pointing up or down and kind of is coming directly out from the side of the shank. Once you're happy with where it is in place, just pull that stuff back and just wrap all the way. There we go. Again, like earlier, you repeat the step on the other side of the shank. Okay. Now you carry on. A couple more X wraps down the shank so that you can find the positioning for your third set of legs. Back. So as you guys can see, my first little strip of sculpting fiber is now run out, so I just need to make sure that I have enough. It's always good to keep the last little bit to use as reference for the next one that you're going to cut, because it'll help with you being able to segment it in a way, especially if you are going to potentially be barring this fly, or if you want the spacing between your legs to be as accurate as possible. Just kind of have a look at how thick it was, grab another piece here. If it's a little bit fat, then just pull some out. That looks fine to me. And you snip it off. Now we repeat that step from earlier again. One more in there. Tight. And now it's one last step before the last set of legs goes in. the last set of legs, so just repeat from the first 2 steps. When you put the legs in, get it into position and just tie it in there, and then again same on the other side. Okay, and as you tie it, you're going to see that it's not even on both sides. That's not a problem, because this is one of those flies where you build it and then you have to trim it and sculpt it and shape it into whatever shape you want the body, whether if you wanted a more like flat coin shaped body or more like streamline, almost like a teardrop shaped body. That's the beauty about this fly. You can kind of chop and change it as you go. Couple more steps here. I think there'll probably be space for 2. Remember, you also don't want to crowd around the dumbbell, because after trimming I'm going to be adding a weed guard. Pull that, make sure pull it nice and tight, pull that last step back, couple of wraps in there, and bring it forward. Snip that off, and then whether you use a whip finish tool or you just do the half hitches by hand, just do 1, 2, 3 for now. There we go. This color sculpting fiber has got a nice translucency to it, so it kind of almost glows from the inside there. You've got the legs, which you can also trim a little bit later, but we'll first trim the body and see what the proportions look like. So usually what I like to do before we do the trimming is I'll just take some Sally Hansen's or some brush on super glue, and this is just basically to make sure that the fly is going to be a little bit more durable. I pull these fibers back and just put a little bit of super glue on those X-wraps there. As I mentioned, you could be fishing for a couple more toothy critters with these flies, something like a smaller GT triggerfish, and even some bumphead parrotfish. So it's always nice to just make sure that your fly is going to last a little bit longer. Okay, so now it's time to do the trimming. What I like to do is I generally like to start as you look at the fly. I'll trim the right hand side first, flip it upside down, make sure these 2 angles line up, and then just this is the part that kind of takes me a little bit longer. Tying the fly is generally quite quick and easy. I'm a little bit more meticulous when it comes to how to trim it. I just brush some of these fibers out with my fingers, hold that like that, and then just take the scissors and give it a trim down here. So I generally start a little bit rounder, so I can leave myself a little bit of room for error. If I do take off a little bit too much at the bottom, then I know I have a little bit to play with on the other side. I do sometimes also like to change that. There you go. That's generally then my first trim on the one side. Just kind of have a general idea and a shape that I want. Then have a look, turn it around, and do the same thing with these legs. Grab them here, pull them to the side. And initially what you want is you just want to make sure that the angle coming down from the dumbbell on the left here is the same as the one over here on the right. When people trim, some guys will stick it in the vise and trim from there. Other guys will hold it like I'm doing currently. It just all comes down to personal preference. I feel that I have a little bit more control with it like this, and it's easier for me to then just grab it. And if I see it looks a little bit skewed, just make sure that it's not just how the fibers are lying. Have a look, and then I can kind of adjust accordingly. But I prefer to trim in hand the way that I'm doing here right now. Okay, so then I'll just have a quick look. I think I need to take a little bit more off here. We'll address that a little bit later, but let me just get these angles at the bottom right. So now what I do is I just grab all the legs in one hand like that. And they're nice out of the way, and I can have a quick look and say, okay, I need to go a little bit more here. What I'm doing at the moment is I'm just thinning out the sculpting fiber slightly. That's going to help with the sink rate of the fly, so that you're kind of taking away some of the bulk but still leaving the overall profile of the fly. Kind of the shape that I want here on the left hand side, but the right hand side is now a little bit still too furry, which isn't a train smash, because all you do then is you just grab them like this again. You can have a look, and you see it's a little bit more taken off over here, so all you do is just kind of carry on trimming on the right hand side here. So when you're happy with the shape of your fly, I like to add a weed guard, purely because a lot of the areas where we are fishing, especially on St. Brandon's and other areas in the Seychelles like Providence, you are inevitably going to find things like turtle grass. There might be some broken coral, and even small bits of coral on the white sand bottom. So I like to tie in a weed guard. It's something that if you don't need it, it's easier to chop it off on the flats than to add it if you do need it out there. So all my flies generally have weed guards on them. The material that I generally use for my weed guards is just like a 30-pound, slightly supple fluorocarbon. So I always chop off a length a little bit longer than what I need. Give it a bit of a pinch here at the bottom. I'll pull it over the eye. I'll do 1, 2, 3 wraps like that, just to kind of keep it in place. What I'll do now is I'll just turn it slightly, and this is just also again just to make sure that the weed guard that you've tied in is a little bit more secure. I put a small bead of super glue at the base here. Go a couple of wraps in front, a couple of wraps in the back. You can again just do your whip finish. and just trim your weed guard down. I like to go a couple of mils just above the point of the hook. And there you go. Have a merkin ready for the flats.
I wanna